So now on to today's webinar topic is we're going to be talking about water. This is our second webinar on this topic. Last month, we walked everyone through how to assess risks when using water on the farm and how to make a water system distribution assessment. Both of these are key requirements in the produce safety rule. Today, we're going to continue that conversation by talking about how to use microbial testing as a further means to assess risks with water, and how to bring all this information together to kind of help you make decisions on how you can best store, convey, and use water safely, both in the field and when you're in your pack house. Our speaker today is my colleague from the Maryland Food Safety Network, Carol Allen. Carol is an ASIN associate at the University of Maryland, and she helps farmers in Southern and Western Maryland achieve their food safety goals. She's a Produce Safety Alliance lead trainer, and she holds a master's degree in plant science with a concentration in plant pathology, plant viruses, and integrated pest management. So without further ado, Carol, take it away.
All right, thank you, Angela. First off, it's important for everyone to know that the University of Maryland and the university programs, activities, and facilities are available to all without regard to race, color, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, marital status, age, national origin, political affiliation, physical or mental disability, religion, protected veteran status, genetic information, personal appearance, or any other legally protected class. And as well, in accordance with federal law and the U.S. Department of Agriculture civil rights regulations and policies, this institution is prohibited from discriminating on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, religious creed, disability, age, political beliefs, or reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activities. So on to today's topic. We're going to be talking about water testing and remediation. We're also going to be talking a little bit about post-harvest water. And I have to let you know, this is a collaborative effort between the Plant Science Food Safety Group at the University of Maryland and the Maryland Department of Agriculture Insurance Program. So I'm going to introduce my silent partners, Alec Lurenka, who is an Administrative Officer 3 in the Food Quality Assurance Program at MDA, and Christopher Walsh, Professor Emeritus in the Plant Science Food Safety Group. Chris has been, besides being my boss, he has been teaching food safety internationally for longer than we're going to talk about, okay? Just say he knows what he's talking about. So I have some good collaborators on this. So some of you guys are new and some of you were tuned in last month, but I want to review, why do we talk about food safety? That's because everyone is entitled to safe food. By that, Angela and our cohorts work in helping farmers eliminate hazards in foods. So what is a hazard? It's anything that could cause harm to the consumer. So typically we associate the hazards with food are biological, chemical, or physical hazards. And today we're going to talk pretty much about biological hazards. So what we're doing is we're focusing on enteric pathogens. The common pathogens that you find as the causal agents in foodborne illnesses are noroviruses, E. coli, 0157H7, Salmonella, and Listeria. So this is one of these pathogens is probably the one that gave you that tummy upset after you went to the family picnic and someone didn't keep the potato salad cold. So you might have a little bit of intestinal distress, vomiting, maybe diarrhea, belly pain for sure. Those are mild symptoms, but in serious cases, you can experience reactive arthritis, hemolytic uremic syndrome, chronic kidney disease, miscarriage, neurological disorders, or even death. The CDC estimates that 1 in 6 Americans will be sick from foodborne illnesses every year. That's about 48 million people, and it results in 128,000 hospitalizations, 3,000 deaths. So this is something definitely to try to avoid on all levels. Okay, so on the farm, we talk about cross-contaminations. One of the things that I probably didn't emphasize enough is those enteric pathogens are frequently found associated with fecal material. And on the farm, there's a lot of different places, let me get my little pointer up here. There you go, pointer. There's a lot of places on the farm where you can get this cross-contamination happening. Certainly in compost piles, if they're not being handled correctly, you might get runoff from a compost pile going into fields where there is produce. So there's techniques, and we're going to cover that in a later webinar. Wildlife in the fields, definitely a problem. Angela's going to handle that next month. I'm going to talk about trying to limit cross-contamination from that aspect. 2 months ago, Shauna Henley talked about workers and the role that they could possibly play in cross-contamination and the ways that you can kind of mitigate some of that cross-contamination. And then there are other things that you may not think about, like transporting produce in an open bed truck as you go down the road. You're going to get dust and other pathogens on that open produce. Handling produce in the field, you see these stacked bins. These might have been, say, cantaloupe or watermelons. And anytime you have a bin that rests on the ground, it's going to pick up some of the soil and the particles. And we know that our pathogens like to hang out in soils. So anything that's on the bottom of that bin on top is now contaminating the produce in the bin below it. So there are techniques to minimize contamination in harvest. And then in the packing house, yeah, I know these are potatoes, but goodness me, I don't think I'd want to eat anything that went through that water. So again, there's techniques of minimizing cross-contamination in the packing house and in the farm. So this series focuses on the 4 W's, and these are the areas where contamination most likely to occur. We talked about workers. We're doing water, wildlife next month, waste later on. So we're going to finish up with water today. Those are known as the 4 W's. So if you hear one of us mention it, that's what we're talking about. So on the farm, you use water in a lot of different ways. Irrigation, fertigation, sprays, whether it be pesticides or growth regulators. For frost protection, for evaporative cooling. This season is already seeing both of those methods of irrigation employed or water use employed. Then when it comes to harvest and post-harvest use, we have hand washing, ice making, washing of tools and equipment, washing and cooling produce, and of course, washing of any kind of surface. So we know that water serves as an ideal environment for microbial growth and movement. And as you can see, there's numerous opportunities for microbial contamination on the farm. So it's important to test the suitability of your water quality so that you can make the decision, the correct decision for its intended use. Whether you're testing it, whether you're using it for livestock watering, chemical spraying, drinking water for sure. So your testing is going to assist you in making informed decisions about your water. And then you can make a proper decision as to how you're going to use it from that particular source. So last month we talked about knowing your risk and knowing your water source. We're going to talk about water testing and how choosing your application method can help mitigate some of that. So again, testing ensures suitability for use, and it's a good record to have. You get to know your water source that way. So what are we testing for? We're testing for generic E. coli. Generic E. coli has been accepted by science as an indicator for possible microbial contamination, and that's for irrigation water. When we get into post-harvest use, then we've got different standards, and we're going to be testing for different things. For post-harvest use, we test for coliform bacteria, turbidity, and nitrates. So how often do we test? Now, these are on the screen, are GAP standards. The produce safety rule does have water quality standards. The first compliance dates for those are coming up in 2022, and there's a possibility that the standards might be altered before we get our final guidance. But I definitely encourage you to start your testing now, get comfortable with the process, and start making a record of the ups and downs in your water source. You may find that your generic E. coli levels are going to change throughout the season. You need to know this. So getting back to how often do we test? Municipal water, if you're using municipal water, you need to know that every municipal water source I know of contains a sanitizer. So you want to get a record from your municipality as to what your water quality is at the beginning of the season and keep that in your farm notes. If you're pulling water from a well, we refer to it as groundwater, then one test per season at first use, first thing in the spring, is usually adequate. Where you're going to want to pull more tests is if you use surface water. And if you use surface water, you think at any time in your crop cycle, you may start out with groundwater, but maybe you back it up later on in the season with surface water. Start testing that surface water from the beginning. So surface water is streams, ponds, rain barrels, above ground springs, any above ground storage that has exposure to the environment. And you're going to want to test 3 times per season: at first use, peak use, and then at harvest. So, whoops, back. There we go. So groundwater, you're going to want to sample at point of use, or frequently we test for, we pull from our closest to the hydrant, closest hydrant to the well. Run your water for several minutes. Make sure that you're not pulling out, you're not testing water that's been standing in the pipes. So let your hydrant run for several minutes to clear those pipes out. If you're pulling from surface water, that's a stream or a pond, you're going to want to sample the water closest to the intake pipe as possible and try to aim to take from the middle of the water column. So not skimming off the top, not dragging near the bottom. Try to grab for the middle of that column. So how do we test? So the first thing you probably want to do is you want to talk to your Maryland State approved water testing lab. They're going to have protocol for storage, for shipping if it's appropriate. You're going to want to know what hours they're open, and even more importantly, what hours they're receiving. Sometimes some of your local water lab may be a satellite facility, and it may not accept samples after 2 o'clock. So these are things that you want to ask them. All right. MDA has a nice printout. You can look at it here. This is the URL. Angela, hopefully you're going to put that URL up so people can look at that. And that is a PDF that you can download. Now, the downside of that is that in the Eastern Shore, there are satellites of, in particular, like Water Testing Labs of Maryland. So this does not reflect all of their satellite locations. You look at this, you go, I'm on the shore. I don't have a lab. Yes, you do, but it's not clear. What you can do is, Angela, hopefully you'll put up the other URL. There is another online source. It's an interactive map. So you may have to have some good some bandwidth to pull it down, but that will contain the locations of your extension offices, your soil conservation offices, and it has more of the locations for the shore. Now, Angela just mentioned that there is another interactive map. And again, you guys that might be out away from a good broadband width may not be able to pull those down. So this one is a pretty good PDF, but just know you're going to need to call your labs and make sure that you have all the locations of the satellites. So I want to go over testing technique. Generally, your lab is going to provide you with sterile containers. However, and that's kind of an example of one of them, this is a Penn State shipping box. So pardon if the example in the screen is not going to match quite what you're using. It's okay. So you're going to go to your lab and get sterile containers and the information as far as how you get them to the lab and the time lapse. You're going to want to use an aseptic technique when you take your water sample. If you've just come in from cleaning out the chicken house, no, go wash your hands and change your clothes, please. You don't want to contaminate your sample. So be clean, hopefully, when you take your samples. You're going to want to have a cooler with you when I go water sampling. I have a cooler in the back of the truck with plenty of ice packs. You're going to want to chill that sample as soon as possible. Start out by labeling the sample jar with the date, the time, okay, the water source. So if you've got several ponds, a stream, and a couple of different, particularly surface water sources or different wells, you're going to want a name that means something to you. And you're going to want to label that sample so that when you get your test results back, it references that particular sample so you won't get confused. And of course, you're going to want your farm name as well. So I know you're in the field and Carol's saying, wash your hands. Yeah, right. Okay. Do the best you can. Put on gloves, and that's going to help protect, it's going to keep you from contaminating your sample. And you say, oh, I could be careful. No, I've actually had a farmer do that. He put his thumb in the top of the cap, and we had some E. coli levels that were really off the charts. That was fun. So this is really important to know if you're doing surface water. Your sample jar contains a preservative. So you're not going to want to double dip, okay? You want to make one grab. And again, try to get into the center of the column, not skimming the top, not dragging the bottom. All right, and here's our little picture about don't touch the inside of the lid. Don't touch the cap or the threads. You want to make sure that you don't contaminate that area with I know they're gloved, but you probably did something with them. So don't contaminate. All right, slip it into a sealable plastic bag. Usually I'm taking several samples from several different sources. That sealable bag keeps your samples, should the lid not be really, really tight, from commingling, which means that every sample that's in that box is going to be problematic. So having a sealable plastic bag for each sample to separate them in the box is a good idea. Then you're going to want to get them to the lab as soon as possible. So now you get the results back. You need to know that, I move my little screen thing. All right. Your results for your generic E. coli levels are going to be expressed in either colony forming units, CFUs, or most probable numbers, MPN. You're going to want to have a number for that. Absence and presence, which frequently is a little bit less expensive, you can use for post-harvest water, but know the standard for post-harvest water is 0. So if you're talking about surface water or groundwater, you want the test that will give you your generic E. coli expressed in either CFUs or MPNs. Both of those units are interchangeable, and it's okay to have them in one or the other. So you're going to get values expressed in CFUs or MPNs, and this is going to be for each well and each surface water source that you have. You're going to want to record those numbers, at least 3 by GAP standards, and you're going to want to take a simple arithmetic average. So you want each value and the simple arithmetic average. So you're going to add those 3 up, divide by 3. You want to record the test values as well as the average, because it depends on what you're doing with the water as to how those values are going to impact it. So this is just a sample result. Most of the labs that I use, I get my analysis results back in about 24 to 36 hours via email. So this is pretty typical. You can see that this is Fredericktown Labs, all right, up near Frederick. And you can see that I've identified this as a pond inlet, all right, and I blocked out the account so you don't know whose it is, all right. You can see the date I took that was last May and the time of day. I'm looking for generic E. coli. This is their notes. And we came up with 64 colony forming units per 100 mLs on this particular sample. So what does that mean to me? All right, so we'll get to that. You're going to want to log this. Now, this is a log template, a water logging template that is available on the produce safety website, our website, along with a lot of other logs. This is just a suggestion. I would probably modify this a little bit, but this is going to give you the idea of some of the data that you're going to want to log in on your log. I would probably do, if I was doing this for GAP, I'd do 1, 2, 3, and then maybe in this column, that row, I would have where my average is. So just to make it very, very clear, but that's just one possibility. So let's look at the results. If we're talking about non-contact water, so we're talking about ag water. This includes irrigation methods where the water does not touch the edible portion of the crop on covered crops. So that's just kind of like the understanding, talking about covered produce. And in this case, non-contact water is where the water does not touch the edible portion. And commonly around here, that's going to be drip irrigation. So your average, that 1, 2, 3 divide by 3, should be less than 126 colony forming units by 100 mLs. And one sample may not be more. So any one sample may not be more than 576 colony forming units per 100 mLs. For contact water, now we're talking about water that is going to touch the edible portion of the crop. So now we're looking at overhead irrigation, we're looking at spraying, we're looking at frost protection, evaporative cooling, any of those particular uses. The average is still going to be less than 126 colony forming units, but now your standard is a little bit more stringent. Your spike or your highest value can be no more than 235 colony forming units. So you can see where testing, and these again are GAP standards, is going to give you the parameters where scientists feel that this is the safest use for your water. This is why multiple testing gives you kind of the profile of what your water source looks like at various times during the year. All right, now your water standards must be potable, or you can call that safe for drinking. Now we're looking at total coliform bacteria, which must be absent or zero. Your turbidity needs to be less than 10 NTUs. Who knows what an NTU is? Well, I looked it up, and I'm going to mispronounce this. So it's a nephelometric turbidity unit. And I just accept their number, but it's got to be less than 10. And your nitrates, less than 10 milligrams per liter. Now, why do we test for nitrates? Because it could have a deleterious effect on particularly pregnant women, and I think young children as well. So the nitrates is something that you want to monitor for the safety of everyone using that water source. The turbidity is a measurement of how much gunk is in the water, usually soil, bits of organic matter. And that, I'm not going to get into the weeds on that very much, but anytime you have that much organic material in the water, it's going to negatively affect any sanitizer that you might be using. All right. So what do you do when things go wrong? All right. So a savvy farmer is going to have a backup plan, and he's probably going to have plans not only B, C, and D, but maybe E as well. So if a test comes back over the allowable limits, you want to stop using that water source. You're going to want to retest, make sure those hands were cleaned and gloved. All right, I've seen that happen. And making sure that your aseptic technique is just spot on. If it's a well, you're testing groundwater, go back and check that wellhead, make sure that you've got no broken bolts, that sanitary seal is intact, you've got no cracks in the casing, and maybe recheck your distribution system depending on where you took your sample, and make sure that you're not suddenly getting entry points for contamination. Now, I do want to point out, if you were with us last month, you already know the answer to this. Take a look at this wellhead. You see how it's lower than the surrounding land, which means every time it rains, you're going to get standing water around your wellhead. And that water is going to infiltrate down along the casing, and it can contaminate your water source. So that's why last month we talked about distribution system checks and how important they can be in making sure that your water quality is where you want it to be. So if you've checked your wellhead, you've gone back and you've checked your distribution system, you can shock the well. Now, if you're interested in shocking a well, you can contact both Angela and I. We've got handouts on how you do that. Your local extension agent may also have information on shocking a well. So look to us for support in that particular instance. If you're using either groundwater with a higher level or surface water, you can use the environmental conditions to allow die-off of pathogens before harvest. I'm going to get into that just a little bit later, a little bit deeper. So just put that on the back burner. We're coming back to that. And of course, If you still are having high values, you're going to want to switch to an alternate water source. If you're using surface water, and this is my backyard, this is Seneca Creek at one of its better moments, right after a thunderstorm. I call it my big muddy. All right. So if you're using surface water and you're finding that you're just consistently or periodically getting higher than allowable rates and numbers, you want to check for upstream contamination. Now that you should have done that, but maybe things have changed. Maybe your upstream neighbor's cattle got through the fence and they're having a wonderful time doing what cows do in streams. You don't want that. Definitely you would look for what the land use was that feeds your surface water, whether it's running water or maybe it's a stream going into your pond. So one of the things that we observed is that pathogen levels typically will rise after a storm. That's twofold. It increases just the volume, stirs up the sediment in the bottom, and you might be getting surface water and you're getting all that salamander poop and bird poop and everything else in there. So if you're going to test, wait until that water calms down again and the sediment settles out, or you're going to get an artificially high number. Also, as we go through the summer, our pathogen population levels can rise with temperature. Now, one of the things that some of my collaborative farmers use is they do consider using an injection system when they're using a lot of surface water. That's something that you want to discuss with your local extension agent and maybe Angela or I as to when that might be something you'd consider. And then I have to emphasize, log all mitigation efforts and their results on your log. And again, you may have to take one of our templates and kind of modify them to suit your particular situation. So there's another way that we can minimize risk, because all we're talking about is risk here. So your water samples give you a value of E. coli, generic E. coli, and that comes down to risk. So in the field, when we're talking about irrigation water, we can use the method of application to reduce our risk. And here in our area, a lot of folks will use drip irrigation because that means that you won't have water contamination to the edible portion of the crop. So it's a nicely laid out field with drip irrigation. If you're using overhead irrigation, you're going to have a greater risk of microbial contamination coming to the edible portion of the crop, except in the case of root crops such as carrots. So let's talk about, I want to check my notes here, using microbial dieoff to reduce risk. So you should probably know from just living that microbes are vulnerable to desiccation and in particular exposure to ultraviolet rays from the sun. So if you must use your overhead irrigation source, all right, and it's close to your date of harvest, you can use the time and the sunshine, this doesn't work with cloudy days, to observe a time interval that it would allow the microbes to die off basically from exposure. So that die-off rate allows a half log of calculated reduction in generic E. coli colony-forming units for each day up to 4 consecutive days between water application and harvest. So how are you going to calculate that? Well, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. So this is a graph that was done by one of my cohorts in our food safety lab. So Sebastian took some of the data that I got from streams last year. And we have 4 samples here. You can see that your values are here. We know that our safe level, according to GAP, is going to be 126 colony-forming units. When you look at the graph, this blue line right down here, I'm tracing it with my little laser pointer, right down there. So we want to be below 126 colony-forming units. Here are our sample values. So let's take a look at our really, really gnarly one. All right, that's sample number 4. All right, coming in at 4,500 colony-forming units per 100 mLs. All right. These are the real numbers. All right. And you can see over time, here's 0, half day, 1 day, day and a half, 2 days, 2.5 days, 3.5 days. And you can see even how that very high number through UV exposure and desiccation by day 4, all right, is below our maximum acceptable numbers. So that is a very visual representation of how using that half-log dieoff can work for you. But it's 4 days and you've got to have sun. Now, in all cases, you're going to want to make sure that you log all of this. And Produce Safety Alliance has a template that will help you in making those calculations. And again, this template is found on our website, and the URL will be coming up at the end of our talk, so you can get this template. Now, the other way, and one that I like to use, is University of California, Davis has an excellent Excel spreadsheet that you can download. And this is going to calculate the dieoff using embedded calculations. So if you're a little hesitant, a little scared to use an Excel spreadsheet, again, Angela and I can help you through that. It's really a plug and chug. You put in your values in one column and it'll give you your dieoff rate in another column. So it uses a geometric mean. So this is not something that you can use for your GAP certification, your GAP requirements, but it will give you your half-log dieoff rate. So the UC Davis Excel spreadsheet is good, but again, if you're GAP, you can just use your arithmetic numbers to meet your requirements. You could use your UC Davis spreadsheet to give you your dieoff number of days. All right, so I want to talk about using sanitizers. So what is a sanitizer? Well, it is an antimicrobial product. It is considered an antimicrobial pesticide. So all of you out there are probably familiar with using pesticides. So some of the same rules apply. Namely, the label is the law. So this is straight from the Produce Safety Alliance. A sanitizer is a substance that reduces the amount of microorganisms to acceptable levels. All right. And typically we use sanitizers for water or contact surface cleaning. You're going to want to make sure that your sanitizer is approved for food contact surfaces. So that's going to be on the label. It's going to be on the front label. So you may elect to use a sanitizer. I mentioned using an injector when you have surface water that has iffy standards. When your water tests indicate that you've got consistent levels above consistent measurement above your desired levels, you may elect to use a sanitizer for irrigation or not. We definitely frequently use it for in the packing house. So whether you use it or whether you not use it is up to the operator. Produce safety rule does not require you to use a sanitizer. It's very important. But if you use it, Produce Safety Rule is going to say you've got to do it correctly. All right. That means that the type of sanitizer, the concentration, and the application rate has to be monitored throughout, and everything is recorded. And the sanitizer label directions are the law. And here is a monitoring log if you were using a sanitizer like in a dump tank. And you can see you may want to modify this a little bit, but it gives you a template to start from. So keeping records. Oh, by the way, our most commonly used sanitizers are usually chlorine-based, peroxyacetic acid, or quaternary ammonia, and they all have different parameters and different monitoring standards. So keeping records, I've mentioned keeping records throughout this talk. One of the things that you're going to keep, or some of the things you need to keep for both GAP certification and Produce Safety Rule. And I want to mention Produce Safety Rule requirements are underlined in this. But this is basically a GAP requirement, basic GAP requirement with PSRs underlined. So you want to keep your laboratory certificate of or other supporting documents as to what kind of testing that they use. And just keep that. You can get that from them. Keep it on file. You want, as previously mentioned, copies of all water tests and all corrective actions. So that's going to be both GAP and produce safety rule. If the average of your 3 samples is exceeded, 126 colony forming units will be upper limit for contact, or 576 for non-contact. Again, your corrective actions are going to be important. Keep a log on that. You want to, first thing in the season, do a water risk assessment and water distribution inspection annually and keep those in your records. If you have a production change in mid-cycle, you're going to want to make your updates in your logs as to what you've done. So in case of worst case scenarios, say something like flooding. Okay, what is flooding? Flooding is going to be where a body of water, a nearby body of water, inundates your field and contaminates your produce. At that point, you cannot use that produce. Probably going to compost it or plow it back into the field. But that event, you're going to want to log. It's going to become part of your management records. A lot of farmers will create a water management plan. So that's going to include SOPs, standard operating procedures, and it's going to include all of your logs for mitigation and a lot of other good things. Anything that happens to your water distribution system, your risk, all of that is going to be part of your water management plan. And also part of that water management plan is going to be the specific training that you give employees on water management. So that would be a task-specific training. You would have that logged as the training. You would have that as part of your water management plan, and you would have logs verifying that you've made sure that your employees are compliant throughout. So it's not just having a training and letting it go. The supervisors, the farmer needs to make sure that your employees stay with the program. So water management plans are going to contain things like preventative controls. And again, this is not a produce safety requirement, but it is a USDA GAP requirement. And I think that it's kind of nice just for good farm management. And this would include what I call your fallback conditions. So you're going to want preventative controls enumerated there, your monitoring and verification procedures. And didn't go into that deeply on monitoring your various sanitizers. I did have a URL for the Produce Safety Alliance, has a good publication on that. And I think Angela put that up. You're going to log all of your corrective action plans, and then all of your water test results are going to be part of that water management plan. Any post-harvest water treatment and your monitoring records, which in a busy harvest is going to be exhaustive. So allow time and effort to make sure that you monitor your sanitizer. If you don't monitor your sanitizer, you don't know that it's working, and you could have contamination occurring in your dunk tank, and you don't want that. Your post-harvest handling records, again, if you're using microbial dieoff or removal rates, monitoring records, all of that. And any supporting documentation, if you do use an alternate approach to regulatory microbiological testing, talk to us about that if you're interested. All right. So to wrap it up, here's a URL. This is the Produce Safety, Plant Science Landscape Architecture, Produce Safety Group's website. All of the templates are on there and a lot of other really good farmer-oriented information. We also have a weekly newsletter that will keep you up on what's happening and what's not, and some good scenarios. One of the things that I find really helpful is this publication put out by Carolina Farm Stewards, the Farmer's Handbook to the USDA Harmonized GAP Standard, and it's got a lot of how-tos. So a lot of things that I was talking about, you'll find there as well. So as always, we're all there to help serve you. If you've got any questions, if there's something that I talked about that you didn't understand, all of us are available. And again, Angela and I stand ready to help you and help assist your extension agent if you have an issue. Okay. And then don't forget to register for next month's seminar. Angela is going to present monitoring wildlife on August 21st. And that's at noon. And there's the URL to register. So are there any questions? And again, apologies for the screen freeze. Boy, it's never done that before. So my apologies. Couldn't have anticipated that.
Well, thank you so much, Carol, for a lovely presentation on water. Everyone who's participating today, just wanted to let you know that you're going to be receiving an email at the conclusion of this webinar to submit an evaluation. And that evaluation really helps us target what we're doing great and what we can improve on for next month's webinar. So now we'd love to open the chat for anybody to be able to ask a question. I can start us off with a question for Carol. So Carol, one question for you. What if you would like to wash produce post-harvest, but you really don't want to worry about adding sanitizer and monitoring sanitizer? What are the options for you then?
Well, you can always field pack and dry pack. You can just bypass the whole washing thing. Even greens. The produce safety rule does not require you to wash produce. You may be washing produce to keep your customer base happy, but you can definitely field pack, and that would, and again, the tubs that you field pack with have got to be cleaned and sanitized. And Angela, are we talking about cleaning and sanitizing further on down in the webinars? I hope so.
Yep, that one will be in September.
All right, stay tuned. Got any more?
Let's see. Well, while we're waiting for the chat, I also have another question. This is just maybe an informational question. Can sanitizer added to my spray tank interfere with my pesticide?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Why would I be using sanitizer in my spray tank also?
Okay, so let's say your and oh my gosh, I could talk for probably about 45 minutes on this. I am a certified pesticide applicator in the state of Maryland and have been for a long time. So if you're pulling water from your pond into your spray tank, hopefully you just tested it and you know what your generic E. coli level is. If it's above the preferred required level of 126 colony forming units, and you're out spraying apples that you're going to harvest in a few days, all right, you could be, if that water is contaminated, you could be adulterating your apples. All right, so you are spraying them with contaminated water, and the USDA kind of frowns on that. That's illegal. So you would probably want to use a sanitizer to bring your number of generic E. coli colony forming units down to below 126 per 100 mLs. But the problem there is, depending on what your spray is, you could have interaction. So you would have to read your labels, always read your labels. There are also a couple of websites that talk about interaction of chemicals. They're presented for the integrated pest management specialist or anyone who is spraying. You can email me for those. But yes, you could have interaction.
Oh, great. We got a question in the chat from Andy. What do you recommend for sanitizing stainless steel tables?
Any one of your sanitizers that's brought to the proper level of effectiveness. Stainless steel is pretty inert, so not much bothers that as far as having a chemical interaction. Was that what you were thinking about, Andy?
I think I would say on this one, if you want to, you might want to just be a little bit more careful if you're thinking about using something like Clorox or bleach, because that sort of thing can pit your stainless steel table at certain concentrations. So maybe for stainless steel, you would want to go with a peroxyacetic acid, like a Sanidate, perhaps.
Okay. Yeah, I when I vision that, I see it being cleaned frequently And yeah, I guess it probably depends on your quality of stainless steel. The tables I've seen don't react because they're very high quality. But yeah, but the peroxyacetic acid would probably be a good choice.
Do you find that the H2O2 mix is a little bit better than using bleach in your own using of it, Andy? Okay, great.
All right. Yeah. And definitely if you're organic certified, that's going to be your choice of sanitizer, isn't it, Angela? Or organic? That's usually what's used.
Usually.
Yeah.
There are other options available
There are
as well.
some others, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else have a question? No problem, Andy. Keep those questions coming. This is what we're here to do. Well, I think with that, we can go ahead and close the webinar today. Thank you, everyone, for joining on this wonderful Friday. This recording will be available soon and up on all of the Maryland Food Safety Network platforms, on MDA, on ALEI, on our platform, and on University of Maryland Extension. So we look forward to seeing everybody next month on the third Friday to talk about wildlife. And that time I will be presenting. So I look forward to seeing everyone then.
All right, everybody, thank you very much for coming.
All right. Yes. Have a wonderful weekend, all. Bye-bye.